chapter 17, verse 32 to 49. David said to Saul, "Let no one's heart fail him because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him. You are just a boy, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and whenever a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went after it and struck it down, rescuing the lamb from its mouth. And if it turned against me, I would catch it by the jaw, strike it down, and kill it. Your servant has killed both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, since he has defied the armies of the living God." David said, "The Lord, who saved me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, will save me from the hand of this Philistine." So Saul said to David, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a bronze helmet on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail. David strapped Saul's sword over the armor and tried in vain to walk, for he was not used to them. Then David said to Saul, "I cannot walk with these, for I am not used to them." So David removed them. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 small stones from the wadi and put them in his shepherd's bag in the pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. The Philistine came on and drew near to David with his shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. The Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the wild animals of the field." But David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This very day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the Philistine army this very day to the birds of the air and to the wild animals of the earth, so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all his assembly may know that the Lord does not save by sword and spear. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." When the Philistine drew nearer to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. David put his hand in his bag, took out a stone and slung it, and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face on the ground. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Please stand as you are able for a reading of the gospel. This is the gospel according to Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Christ. You may be seated. Our hymn of preparation is "Gather Us In," which can be found in our Faith We Sing, Ben Blackman, hymn 2236. As I mentioned earlier, we have two wonderful stories today. We have our Old Testament story of David and Goliath, and trusting in God to go up against the giants in your life, those dangerous giants that are always trying to confront us in our lives. And then we have the story from our New Testament, from our gospel today, the reading out of Mark, that has also, it's about fear and faith and hope and belief in what you're doing and what's going on around you. Both of these stories have the same, they're similar in this way, as they both talk of faith. They both talk about having faith in God to make sure that you get through this. But it's also about trust. The disciples in the boat, they're fishermen. They have been fishermen all their life. And they're not alone. There are several fishermen in the boat with Jesus. Plus, there are other boats of other disciples who are also fishermen that are traveling with him. If we look in the story, you note he's not alone. He's not the only boat. There are more than one boat. There are other boats with him. And they're traveling across the Sea of Galilee. Jesus has just finished a sermon on the side of a mountain, or actually he was in the boat on a lake, preaching out into a cove, talking to all the people. And he was talking to them about faith and about love and about hope. And he was healing people, and he was doing all of these wonderful things. He had just before he left into the boat, he had healed a leper, another leper in their midst. So he kept doing these wonderful, miraculous things, and he was tired, and they got in the boat, and he says, let's go across the lake. I don't think he was going across the lake to go to the other side to go preach. I think he was actually looking for some quiet out there on the lake where he could take a nap, where he could get some rest. He's been working for days, it seems like. If you look at the story, he's been at this for days, and he hasn't taken a break. And so he's taken a break here, and he asks his disciples, let's go across the lake. This will give him an opportunity to rest. And so that's what he does. He gets in the boat, and what does Jesus do? He grabs himself the cushion, and he crawls into the back of the boat, and he goes down, and he lays down, and goes to sleep. Because he's tired. He's been working. He's been working hard. The disciples are rowing across, and just as they're rowing across, a storm comes up. Now, honestly, this is not unusual for the lake that they're in. It's a low lake surrounded by hills, with passages through these hills, and it actually creates windstorms in this sea. And they're very powerful windstorms. It happens to this day. There's a name for them even, and I don't remember the name. I think it starts with a G. But there actually names these storms because they happen frequently enough that they name them. That there's a name for them, just like the Sirocco is, a windstorm in some parts of our country. A Sirocco is a heavy windstorm. And so the storm comes up. And the wind and the waves are beating against the boat. And in some ways, this is a parallel to the Jonah story. There's a lot of the Jonah story mixed into this story. These two stories parallel each other. If you remember in the Jonah story, the storm comes up. Jonah is sleeping in the boat. And the sailors are all nervous and worried and confused, and they don't know what's going on, and they're worried that somehow the gods are mad at them, and they go down and they wake up Jonah. The same way here, the disciples, they've got the storm and the rain and the wind and all of this going on, and here is the reason why they're out on the boat is sleeping at the back of the boat while all this is going on. Now you would think these are fishermen. They'd be used to this kind of thing to happen. They would be not comfortable with it, but they would know what they were supposed to do. They would know how to deal with this. And yet, they're afraid. They're frightened about this. And they wake Jesus up. Don't you care what's going to happen to us? As if Jesus could do something about it. Imagine that. They actually think Jesus can do something about this. They wake him up. Don't you care that we're all going to perish? And so Jesus stands up and he commands peace, shalom. be still. And again, it's a command. If you look at the text, there's an exclamation point at the end of each word. Peace, be still. And the wind stops, and it calms. Just like in the Jonah story, when they dealt with the issue, the problem solved. Jesus stands up, peace be still, the wind stops, the rain stops, the storm, and it's a dead calm. Even the sails now aren't full because it's a dead calm. Anything knows about being at sea and being in a dead calm means that the ocean isn't moving. It's just flat. There's no wind. There's nothing. It's just flat, still. I spent a year on a ship and traveling across the world and back, and went through a couple of serious storms while I was on this ship. Now, I'll admit, I'm not on a little fishing boat. I'm in an aircraft carrier, which doesn't move all that much in reality. It does rock a little bit every once in a while. The storms get hard enough and strong enough. Even an aircraft carrier will get you seasick. Even an aircraft carrier. And there was a couple of those where the storms would come in and be so strong that I'd be in my bunk and I'd be rolling around in my bunk and actually getting seasick because of the storms. So I can understand their fear in this, is that being out at sea in a storm is terrifying. It can be terrifying, and so they were terrified. But I want you to note the question that Jesus asked them. He doesn't ask them, well, what he asked them is, in reality, he asked them, what are you afraid of? Why are you afraid? What are you afraid of is really the question he's asking them. Are you afraid of the storm? Are you afraid of the unknown? Are you afraid of not knowing what's going to happen next? Is that why you woke me up? So I could explain to you, show you what's happening next. Maybe that's it. But Jesus' question to them is, why are you afraid? You've got me in the boat. You've got God on your side. You've got everything going for you. So why are you afraid? This is kind of the same thing that Goliath dealt with, or that David dealt with Goliath. He's talking to Saul. And Saul's trying very hard to make him look bigger, stronger, scarier. Puts armor on him, puts a helmet on him, gives him all this armor. These are things that this shepherd has never worn before. He's a shepherd. He kills lions and bears with a slingshot or a staff. He doesn't use a sword and shield and armor and all. He doesn't need all of that stuff. In fact, when Saul puts it on him, he walks around and he goes, no, this isn't going to work. Saul has already sent him out, told him, go out and fight. And David, well, let me walk around this a little bit. No, this isn't going to work. I've never worn this stuff. I don't know how to move in this. So he takes it all off, and then he goes out. And he faces this guy in his shepherd's clothes. He looks young, and yet he has no fear. The story tells us this. David had no fear. Saul, the king, had fear, and he's wearing armor, and he was afraid. The soldiers out in the field there in the trenches looking across to the Philistines are looking at that, and they're afraid. And David in his shepherd's cloak walks out, and he's not afraid. He's got God on his side. For some reason, it's just reminded me of another story from my own personal life. I was on an aircraft carrier, again, like I mentioned, and one day they called me up and said, we need you to go onto the shore and go to the embassy and get some stuff, get some paperwork there, and bring it back. So I got on the helicopter, we flew off the ship, and I'm wearing camouflage utilities with a soft cover. This is all soft stuff, like what I'm wearing now, soft clothes. No armor, nothing like that. I get on the helicopter, and they fly us to the airport. I step out of the helicopter and I start walking across the tarmac toward a building that I'm supposed to be going to meet the guy in the Jeep who's going to take me to where I'm supposed to go, take me to the embassy. So I'm walking across the tarmac and I hear an angry bee go by me. And concrete chips off the tarmac and flies away. And I go, excuse me. And I stopped walking. I started running because someone was shooting at me. And I'm not wearing body armor. I've got no armor on. Just like David walking out there in his shepherd's clothes, he's got no armor. But unlike me, who was absolutely terrified, he was not. In fact, he moves toward Goliath. He moves toward the battle. And he gets within slingshot range, and Goliath is ready for a up front, up close, in person, let's get in wrestling distance, is what Goliath was expecting. He wanted to get within sword distance. But David doesn't need to get within sword distance. He doesn't get up close and personal. He takes one of the 5 stones. Again, that's another story, the 5 stones. Goliath had 4 brothers. So you know that. It was Goliath and 4 brothers. Why did David pick up 5 stones? It's a whole different sermon. So he takes the 1 stone, puts it in the sling, and he lets it go. Hits Goliath in the forehead. Goliath falls over and dies. The story ends there with Goliath falling over and dying, but that's not where the end of the story is. David then comes along within the next couple of verses, comes along, takes Goliath's own sword with him and removes Goliath's head. There was a point to that, and I'm going to get to the point eventually here. There was a point to that, is that this was a demonstration of the power of Adonai, our God, in comparison to the power of the Philistine god Dagon. If you remember just a previous story back in Judges, back at the end of Judges, they brought the Ark of the Covenant and they put it in Dagon's temple. And during the night, Dagon fell over and his head fell off. It was laying beside him. That's what David was showing. He was repeating what happened to Dagon with Goliath. He was showing, my God is stronger than your God. Because I not only defeated your greatest warrior, but I removed his head. Just like, and the Philistines would have remembered back what happened not that long ago in Dagon's temple. They would have remembered. And the power of Israel's God proved that he was stronger than the power of the Philistine God. And that David, this little shepherd, this young man he was not tall, but he was good looking, but he was also powerful in the fact that he could do this. That he could take the faith that he has in God and turn it into a weapon to defeat the enemies. We face giants in our life. We face storms in our own life that cause us to be afraid, that cause us to be fearful, that cause us to hesitate, to pause, to look and say, maybe not. Maybe I won't go do this. But I think as long as we have God with us, even if the bad happens to us, God is with us and hold us up and carry us through. As I say at almost every funeral or every memorial service, death is a cold spot in the middle of a room that you rush through, that you get through quickly, because God is with you to hold you through that cold spot in the middle of the room that is death. And so, have faith. Have belief that God is with you. And no matter what happens, no matter what kind of giants you have to face, God's with you and will walk you through it if you trust and believe that he will. Amen. Our closing hymn, actually our hymn of departure is We Walk by Faith, which can be found in our Faith We Sing, hymn 2196. And we'll sing the last 3 verses, verses 3, 4, and 5. a circle, those that are comfortable doing so. Greet each other in peace. We'll share God's love and sing our closing hymn, which is There Be Peace, which can be found in our United Methodist hymnal for those who do not know it, hymn 431.